Hello and welcome to Jekyll Geek's RPG Realm. I am Jekyll Geek and this is my RPG Realm. If you were listening to my last video about my experiences at SoccerCon, or if you've just been watching along to my Let's Plays and saw that I did a review of Nimble after finishing most of my Nimble videos, but I haven't done a video of Fabula Ultima's review, and we're expecting a Fabula Ultima review. Here is the review that you're looking for. And if you weren't expecting a Fabula Ultima review, well, surprise Fabula Ultima review. So what is Fabula Ultima, you might ask? Fabula Ultima is a tabletop RPG that seeks to emulate JRPGs, or JRPGs being a type of video game, obvious coming from Japan, that's where the J comes from, that are RPG games, such as Final Fantasy, or if you look into my solo play, games like Dragon Quest and Rune Factory. Fabula Ultima does not have a set setting for the game. In fact, you are encouraged to create the setting along with your fellow players if you are the game master of this game. Although there are three different settings for this game, being heroic fantasy, techno fantasy, and natural fantasy. Or if you are in to know of what the JRPGs that this game is about, heroic fantasy, aka Final Fantasy like 6 or 4 or 9 or something like that, as well as maybe a Fire Emblem game. Techno Fantasy being this game is Final Fantasy VII or Xenogears, and Natural Fantasy is this game is an Atelier game. But of course, you can make just about any sort of RPG that you want with it, just as long as it has the odd fantasy stuff like giant swords, or there's guns and medieval stuff, and there's airships and stuff like that. Basics of every Fabula Ultima character, and if you look in the monster section or the recently released monster manual of the game, is that all characters have four stats, being dexterity, insight, which is sort of your intelligence stuff, which also deals with magic, might, which is your strength plus constitution, and willpower, which is something that also deals with magic often and also gives you your magic defense. And instead of a static number like most RPGs have for their stats, the stats in Fabula Ultima range from a D6 to a D12, being these are the stats, well, the dice that you roll when you're using such a stat. For example, if you really need to do something like lift some heavy object or move some heavy object, you'd roll might twice, as in every roll requires you to use two dice from usually two different stats, unless it's something that really goes behind one stat, like the before mentioned lifting a heavy object. Or but say if you were climbing, it would be probably dex plus might, which you roll your two dice, one for your dexterity attribute and one for your might attribute. Also, when creating a character, you have three important things called your identity, which is sort of your made up class, as in you could be, say, just call yourself a Dark Knight, even though I think there's an actual Dark Knight class in this game, or Dark Warrior, but or like a airship pirate or whatnot, which determines some things. You can use a type of point called Fabula points to re-roll something that deals with your either your identity or your theme, which is another thing you have to create, as well as your origin, which can determine some other possible bonuses and rerolls that you can get. But yes, there's a lot of these very nebulous stats which are about creating your own very individual character. And one other thing is you have bonds, which you have your bonds with your other character, which if you invoke a bond, you can get a bonus from between 1 to 3, depending on how complex this bond is. And it is important to have allow your characters to form bonds with each other because a +1 to a stat is, well, not to a stat, but to a roll is very important. For example, the aforementioned lifting a heavy object, the being a total might roll. The difference between the average roll of, say, a 98-pound weakling and a character that regularly hits the gym and looks like they eat steroids as candy is the average roll between those two characters is a difference of 4. So even a +1 bond is a big, big bonus to remember to have. And these bonds are important because, as any veteran GM knows, it is important to have your characters, your player characters, try to be at least somewhat cohesive. And bonds are something that you can use to have the players want to be cohesive, which is, I'd say, a very important thing and a very good plus for this system. The other main point of character power, as you can be pretty much any race as or ancestry or species, and it doesn't have any mechanical benefits or disadvantages. For example, your character could just be, say, the cat-eared character that you might see it in some of the character art, but that doesn't matter. But the other important thing that is really different is the class system in Fabula Ultima, being that as your base, you start off as a level 5 character between 2 or 3 multi-classes. And yes, multi-classes is considered the default of the game. And these classes vary from your spiritus, which is your white mage or pseudo cleric of the game, to your weapon master, or you are someone that can pilot a mech if you have the techno fantasy. And yes, each of the Atlas books, being the heroic fantasy, techno fantasy, and natural fantasy, come up with an additional 4 classes as in addition to the 10 basic classes in the game. Even so, I think it is very important to remind the game master, say someone that is familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, that a class in Fabula Ultima is not like a class in, say, a traditional game like Dungeons and Dragons, whereas being a fighter is your entire identity, or being a wizard or a ranger is their entire identity. If class level in Fabula Ultima is sort of like taking a perk or a feat, and the character progression system has a little bit of perks and leeway to it, but you effectively get one more point, one more level to get another perk or another feat or another small bonus or spell in the game, roughly once every 2 sessions of the game. One thing that I think a game master running a Fabula Ultima game needs to be very cognizant of is the abilities of the players, as unlike a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where you may have to worry about your players' power overpowering the game. Fabula Ultima is a game like where I learned that you really need to very much lean into the so-called philosophy of shoot your monks because a lot of abilities in Fabula Ultima are very conditional and you have to look into getting ways to make those characters work. For example, there's one class that made like a wayfarer or a lore master, which has very little combat utility, and you need to watch out for stuff like that. Otherwise, you may overwhelm your characters. In fact, the later part of my solo play was almost changed. Well, actually, it actually was sort of changed into a pseudo tutorial to some of the classes and how to make them work for said classes, including a defensive class called the Guardian. Even though one of my beliefs about Fabula Ultima is that looking for the game, it is almost best to be a pseudo glass cannon for the game, as one of the quirks of it is that you cannot permanently die unless the player, in fact, allows the game master to let the character die permanently. And if not, your the character would consider to be surrendered, which is you suffer some sort of setback, and the is when you in a JRPG you face your sort of invincible boss enemy that is there for just story reasons, but you end up just on the floor and you wake up and the story's a bit worse off for wear, but you still trudge on to eventual victory. Ultima being a very story focused game like that, as also it is very important to create characters with a sort of an arc to them and various hooks into the world as opposed to having a game master that has a big campaign idea that the players are supposed to feed into. One final thing that I want to touch on before giving a final thoughts on the game is the inventory system, which is sort of a nebulous system where you have something called inventory points, normally 6 points, unless you have some sort of class skill that bumps that up a bit. And you can come up with just out of nowhere, if you have inventory points, you can just get an elixir or a potion which heals your HP or your mind points, which they say mind points, so your sort of more martial type characters can use mind points for their techniques, as well as your spellcasters, which just use them for spells. And I found this to be a nice way to have at least some healing if there isn't a dedicated healer to the game. And even so, it's something that allows the system to move a bit smoother in a way. So I do like the randomized, well, not randomized, but sort of nebulous inventory system to the game. But overall, I found Fabula Ultima to be a good RPG, but I think it is a bit of a finicky sort of RPG that needs a lot of work with Game Master to really work with the players to get the most out of it. And if you're not doing what you're thinking, you're not thinking about what you're doing and what you're going to do with this game. If you're a game master, it is easy to get stuck in a rut or a failed campaign. And I say it is a good game, but it is one that you really have to worry about uh, doing the right things with. And I don't suggest this for a starter game master, even if they do like Final Fantasy. But those are my thoughts on the game, and I hope you found this video slightly educational and somewhat entertaining, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.